Everyone's having a fantastic day. We're going to give it a couple of minutes here as people tune into the session. And as you come in, if you're on the last one, let us know if you joined us for the first episode where we talked about discovery with Alex. Shout out to him. We had a masterclass on how to do that well. So hopefully you all enjoyed that bit. But if this is your first time here, let us know where you're tuning in from as well. And also let us know if you maybe have a win of the week. We're on Thursday. Maybe something exciting happened you want to share with us. That's fantastic if you did. But also just let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from, what's going on, and we'll dive right into the session today. But let's ask our panelists, Carell, Jonathan, how y'all doing today?
Very good, thank you, Morgan. Not bad at all. Excited to be.
Yeah.
Awesome. Same here. Doing excellent, Morgan. I'm actually on vacation. We talked later. I had a shirt with out of office on before, but I thought that would look more proper today. But I'm tuning in from Barcelona. I have my road bike behind me. I'm just out cycling and eating good food. So vacation, but couldn't miss the opportunity to jump on episode 2 for Revenue Rebels.
Absolutely. We'll get right into it, into the tactics. And what have you enjoyed the most actually so far about Barcelona? No,
but I mean, this is a fourth time, same time of year. Recipes pretty much the same. They have fantastic mountains and fantastic food. So I'll jump on the bike, burn a couple of calories, and find some fantastic place to eat some good food at. And yeah, that's about it. Rinse, repeat, get some good sleep. But people are very friendly as well. Like it's a very easy. I think you, Jonathan, you said also you like Barcelona, but I mean it's an easy place to like.
Oh, it's got everything. Got the beach, good food,
accessible,
brilliant place.
Sounds like I need to check it out, and other people as well. Sounds like you've got a new vacation spot. But we're not here to talk about vacation spots. We are here today to talk about objections handling. And if you do not know what this series is about, this is Revenue Rebels presented by Get Accept. And our whole goal here is to figure out how can you do things differently? How can you look at your sales process in a unique way so that you can be innovative and break through the noise and convert the opportunities that you're looking for? So that's what we're going to be discussing today. And again, in this episode, we're going to be talking about overcoming objections, how to turn the no into yes. So as we get into the introductions here on who's on the panel and what we're going to be discussing, on a scale of 1 to 5, so 1 being like, I'm brand new to this, I don't really know much yet, 5 being like, I'm excellent at this, what would you rate yourself in terms of handling objections? So 1 is novice, new, I'm just getting into this, right? 5 is like, I am excellent, I am great. Let us know in the chat where you're at. We want to see. And the goal is, right, is for you all to get 0.5 better at the end of this. That's why I always tell people. But as you all decide what that number is for you, let's go into the guest. So our guest today is Jonathan, VP of Sales at Cognizant. But Jonathan, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll move over to Carell.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So pleasure to be here, guys. As Morgan said, my name is Jonathan. I'm the VP of Global Sales at Cognizant. We are a B2B contact data provider specializing in global data, and my role is overseeing our sales operations. So our SDR function, account executive function, predominantly focused on the new business side. And we have operations across Europe, the US, and we're HQ'd in London. So yeah, we sell to salespeople. Probably the toughest group to sell to. And yeah, happy to share some of our experiences and I'll say we operate in quite a competitive space as well. So typical objections that you get all the time. Pricing is probably one of the key ones that we see all the time in the data space. So yeah, happy to chat. And thanks more.
Yeah, absolutely. Great for you to be here. And then Carell, tell us about yourself in this introduction as well.
Yeah, sure. Of course, my name is Carell. I'm one of 4 co-founders, but also the Chief Revenue Officer at Get Accept. So very similar to Jonathan as well. I mean, leading out our customer-facing teams, AEs, SDRs, and account manager, sales operations, partnerships, and so forth. And Get Accept, we're the digital sales room platform, both the creator but also the leader of the space, and we focus a lot. And I think this subject is super interesting because our platform is also how you actually gather stakeholders to overcome objection and stakeholder complexity. So this is a subject very dear to my heart. Otherwise, I've already mentioned before, for the people who joined very early, personally, I just really enjoy being outside in nature when I'm not working in tech. So being on my bicycle is the one thing I love the most outside of work.
Awesome. And I'm Morgan, founder of AMP, and we focus on identifying activating subject matter experts and influencers. And in this conversation today, with my background on sales training, we're going to be talking about handling objections. So I'll be the host, I'll be guiding the conversation and unpacking the information from these two who are leading sales teams, been in sales, and have seen growth in the companies that they have been a part of. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is defining the objections. And what exactly does that mean? So one thing that in my sales training that I have seen is that there's the difference between a real objection and a brush off. And I know we have a different amount of people here in the room today. And so this will be a couple things that we do talk about, which is why I'm going to open up this poll to start, which is who is in the room. So if y'all could vote on who's in the room here today, AE, SDRs, are you in RevOps, sales leadership? And this just gives us a pulse check. And the reason that we're doing this is because if you think about SDRs, the objections that they're facing are going to be just different than like an account executive, right? And you have to look at those things from a different vein. But as we talk about this today, the real objections are, hey, something really is happening. We need to dig a little bit deeper. And brush offs typically happen in the cold approach. And you probably need to ask some questions to figure out what's really going on. So I'm going to open this up to you, Carl. Like when you look at your team from the SDRs and the AEs across the board, what distinguishes a genuine objection from just a mere brush off in a sales interaction?
No, but I think you covered it a bit in the beginning. I think it's very different if you're early in the process trying to convert someone to a sales qualified opportunity of some sort or a real opportunity. You'll encounter a lot of more brush offs. I mean, those are like pretty much, to me, it's a way of people are too afraid of just saying a straight no to you and get you off the phone, and they're trying to come up with what they believe is going to be something that's going to dishearten you to stop, right, and to get you to stop. And I think the number one thing that we talk about and that I've been taught throughout my entire career is take them on the shoulder, take them with a smile on your face, and never let them get you down. That's an easy way. Tackle every answer with a smile, even if it's super negative. React like you're a stone wall from those. They just bounce off. Okay, great that you're concerned about that. Let us cover that a little bit more. And I think that's more of a brush off. And then when I'm thinking about real objections from the perspective of a sales cycle, so qualified opportunity to close, there are genuine objections to talking to someone who wants to proceed or see an opportunity to proceed with you as a potential vendor, and what those truly are, and uncover what are the reasons behind it, peeling that onion to truly understand them. And I think those are two big differences between the two, and you need to train differently on those two when it comes to training and frameworks on how to handle them.
Yeah, Jonathan, what would you add to that when it comes to how you're talking to your team about those objections, right? We're also talking to sales leaders here too, right? So how are you approaching that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Carl or both of you made a really good point just in terms of the difference between the SDR and the AE world. I think particularly for the SDRs, like most conversations are typically out the blue, and you're trying to gather some time and actually generate that interest initially. So that's usually when you're going to face a lot more brush offs, because it generally is out of the blue. Whereas when it's in the AE cycle and it's a live opportunity, it's usually just a lack of understanding, and that's really when you tend to get the real objections come into play. So that's really how I decipher the two. Is SDRs are much earlier, probably lack of clarity, not in a buying cycle, whereas account executives there's usually a given interest as to why they're having that conversation.
So now we have the distinction between both. We talked about like tactics really to understand how to like define those objections and going into it. So most people in here, we had a range of different numbers all the way from like 1 to 5, right, of what they were struggling with. So when you think about like why do reps struggle with the objections? Why do they falter? And what are y'all doing to address that mentally for them to prepare? And also in the chat as well, you all can comment too, like for those of you who maybe were below a 3, right? Like what are the reasons that you struggle with objections? Put in the chat. We can help answer that in the Q&A. But for both of you, how are you like combating with your team? How are you getting them mentally prepared to face these objections?
Yeah, I think if I can kick this off, I think generally every individual buyers think that everything is unique to them. And I think as a sales rep, when you're in the seat and you're doing 50, 100 calls a day, like it literally is rinse and repeat in terms of what the typical objections are or brush offs that you tend to face. And I think the real art of being a a successful SDR is like mastering your craft, and that comes with practice. So the more dials that you do, the more role play that you do, the more accustomed you're going to be to what the objections are that typically come up. And one thing that we really push on heavily, and this really comes into like when our SDRs are ramping, is making sure that they're in the office, sat next to a high performer. And you can't train that like being remote, being live in the office and hearing how people are tackling objections, top performers, like naturally they pick that up, sitting alongside them. So that's one way that we've really tried to, on the ground, away from like the tactics of how to tackle an objection, but make sure that they're in one particular room, all working together. And yeah, I think role play is absolutely huge. We put a huge emphasis on that when it comes to onboarding SDRs, and using technology such as like a gong, or we were talking about this the other day, like the replicates and hyperbounds to like really amplify that. But building catalogs is 101. Like we have gone catalogs for typical objections, calls recorded that show that, and we've seen really good success using stuff like that.
I want to unpack something you said to Jonathan, about to the audience for you all. You mentioned role playing. So put a 1 in the chat if you do role plays with your reps, or as a leader, you're role playing with your team right now, whether you use software or you're getting on a virtual Zoom, or maybe you meet in person. Put a 1 if you're role playing. Jonathan, how do you set up the role plays? This is an important question. All right. So they treat it seriously. All right. Because sometimes you can do role plays, right? And the reps like going back and forth and they're like playing around, and like it's not a serious role play. So how are you making sure that that environment is a serious environment where they are learning from it and they're not just joking around?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think this starts from day one, like expectations when people land in the organization. Like it should be a very safe space for individuals to be able to learn and develop. And I think if you make that core to your philosophy and culture, that it's a culture of development, then generally the reps, when they enter the organization, really do take that seriously. So that's one way that we do that. Yeah, and I think how we do the role plays, like we do multitude of different ones. We do different personas, persona training. We do segment training, because our SMB business is very different to our enterprise business, and the expectation that we want from a cold call will vary differently from a SMB rep to an enterprise rep. So yeah, I think really drilling down, understanding your persona in detail, because objection is going to vary persona to persona, industry to industry. And that's typically how we've done that. And we're very lucky that we tend to promote a lot of people internally as well. So our SDR managers have come from our SDR cohort. They know that's been core when they were training, and they embody that as they grow through the organization.
Okay, cool. So you're making sure that people internally are getting promoted, which is great, so they can follow that, let's say, rigor or regimen moving forward, so that they can see success.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you mentioned personas, and I want to bring this to Carl, because you have different products obviously within your product that you're selling, which obviously leads to different conversations, different objections, even probably different personas. And I'm assuming people in here in the chat, you don't have to let us know, but you're listening in, you probably are like, well, okay, like I know I need to handle objections, but I might be talking to this persona and this personality. How do I manage that? So Carl, I guess for you is, as you're looking at coaching your team and leading your managers, how do you adopt your objection handling approach to different personalities and different customers? Because that also might be something that we could dive into a little bit deeper here.
No, I think that's a perfect subject. I was listening to everything Jonathan said, but I think to the start of your first question there, I want to add there, like, Morgan, what's one of the most common mistakes that I feel, and I'm on the buyer side quite often, and I know, Jonathan, you are as well, is that a lot of people go into some type of war mode when they're going into objection handling, so they kind of change the pace.
War mode?
yeah, but they become very aggressive, right? They're prepared. They've done the role play, and I think it's really important. We talked about before, when it comes to just handling any objection, just the same tonality, and say, yeah, I fully understand you. That's great. I understand that that's the objection that you have. But instead of, they kind of up their energy so much, they want to fight that objection rather than truly to understand where it comes from, and that creates a wrong starting place to handle that objection. And that's where a lot of people go wrong, because usually the initial objection maybe isn't the main reason why they're asking it or bringing it up. There's a deeper meaning to that, and then you take all that energy to tackle something that maybe wasn't that important. So that's one part. And then to come back to the personas, I think I'll take it from our perspective. Training on personas, they're so very different. And Jonathan said something. We also sell to salespeople, the hardest people to sell to, because they know exactly all the tactics. They know the backgrounds if they're good enough. So, but we sell, for example, to we have personas that are people like Jonathan, VPs of sales. We have sales directors. We have sales operations. We have different levels of individual contributors, CMOs, VP marketing, and you really have to understand and define and build a framework on those personas. So we've set our personas up and talk like, what are their objectives from a main perspective? How do they play out? What are the things they think about? What language do they use? So we can really train people on them. So when you do that role play, which I also think is quintessential, like Jonathan says, is can they actually practice and understand the differences between the different personas in that role play? And we, for example, are currently trying out what Jonathan also, I know we were in common, that we're trying out the AI software called Hyperbound to try these things out on discovering, asking questions to different personas. And if you're not doing that, if you kind of do the one size fits all, you're only going to hit home 1 in 4 if you have 4 personas, right? You're going to go all in with one, off the shelf type of objection handling, and you're not going to be very successful. The other part of objection handling that I think is so important is also, if you can, is the ability to specialize reps into certain industries. If you cover if your ICP is a plethora of different types of businesses or different personas, can you potentially make it easier for some of the junior reps to be more specialized in beginning, to learn one step by step, than trying to push them into 4 industries, 4 different personas in once, and kind of train them that way. So that's a second way you can handle that difficulty when it comes to onboarding people.
Yeah, so that was a excellent breakdown. So a couple of things before we go to the next question here. Number one is, this is the first time, Carl, that I've heard war mode. So I think now everyone, so I hope like everyone right now understands not to go in war mode when you go into objection handling. So now you have a good premise there. 2 is asking the chat here. I know I saw one person mention it. Is anyone using an AI tool to help with their objection handling? We mentioned Hyperbound. There's Luster out there, Replicate. There's a lot of ones that are coming up right now. Are you using that? Yes or no? Let us know in the chat. And then also as well, as we're having this conversation, like I said, go in the Q&A for the prize. Whoever has the best question, you will get some Revenue Rebels gear. You see it right now. You probably see on the camera. I have the hat. It's extremely comfortable. There's a shirt as well that's also comfortable as well. So whoever asked the best question will get the giveaway on that for merchandise if you want it. So best question is going to get that. So let's start asking some questions and get interactive there. But when it comes to, right, that objection handling piece, right, a lot of people in here we see are not using it. So definitely something to check out if you're not. There's a lot of good development there. Before we go into like the frameworks of like how people can really dive into this, what are you doing to cultivate a continuous culture of objection handling beyond role playing? What are some other things that you're doing? Are there like spiffs involved? Or there's ways you're listening to your team? Like, how are you continuously having that culture be there beyond just the role play, beyond even just like continuously promoting people, which is open to both of you and however you see that?
I'll kick off. So like maybe one of the key things that we try to encourage is like, and this goes across the entirety of like SDRA, is putting a huge emphasis on active listening. I think that's probably the biggest, or the way that you overcome objections successfully is actually being present in the conversation. I think a lot of sales reps, they kind of have a set structure of questions they're going to ask and rebuttals, and before the person's even communicated what their answer is, the sales guy's already got a response in their head, right? So for us, like that active listening piece is core to how we hire, and it's core to how we train the team. So yeah, I think when we go into the frameworks, like the first part of the framework that we embody and we push out is listening, and being fully present. So not being distracted when you're on the cold call, like being live in that call and really listening to understand what the root of cause of that objection is, rather than coming out with just a boilerplate interruption, or like Carl said, like kind of the war room tactic where you're instantly on the back foot. It's really about acknowledgement, feeling and relating to them, and having that empathy. And that's something that we really focus on, is like the active listening piece.
Carl, anything you would add to that piece?
No, second, first of all, active listening, very useful tip in all of your life, personal, last professional. I one thing that we, and I take more of a leadership and leadership structure that you can set for your business, not just on the individual piece, but where do you talk about objections outside of role play, for example? So how we've set up our weekly cadence, we have, of course, the one-on-ones between managers and reps, which of course they're discussing deals and potential objections, uncover potential risk. But also in a group setting, we run our weekly stand-up as a whole sales team. We have the weekly stand-ups divided by AEAMs, because SDRs, they can be different, of course, depending on team. But we also have a weekly deal review where somebody brings a deal and we discuss it in length and go over objections. And then the idea there is to uncover answers to that deal or to those objections that the individual who presenting and prepared ahead of that deal review haven't come up with yet. So it's a way of kind of knowledge sharing in those ones. And when you start to get in a cadence of natural objection handling or discussing issues in deals, that's so important. So it doesn't become just one forced opportunity once a month or every 2 weeks to sit and role play, but how are you actually discussing real deals? So things like call recording software are so important. So you can pull up that. So if you know you're prepping for it, me as a manager, I've heard we're struggling with this objection or an objection tied to a competitor currently. Find those ones, go ahead and be a bit proactive and bring them up as a group and tackle them, right? And it's an easy way. Like if you're struggling, and I think everybody struggled last year, right? There's no budgets any left. Like, how do we tackle the issue? There's no discretionary budget. I can't sign anymore. Every deal has to go to VP of Finance. I mean, instead we just sit and wait, or do we sit and try to do something about it right now? Do we sit down and actually discuss, hey, vast majority of deals are either getting stalled or lost due to this issue. Sit down and discuss it, set up a workshop, see if your reps and your team can come up with some ideas. We always ask one question: what is the most powerful thing that we can do that we yet not are doing right now when it comes to handling this objection? Get people to come up and brainstorm ideas. Maybe you come up with 3 ones and then tackle the most important objections. And I mean, this framework works for pretty much every business problem that you have, but in sales, it's very powerful because sales reps likes to be collaborative. They like to showcase, I found an idea that's going to work. So those are ways that you can operationalize a way of handling objection as a business.
Awesome. So hopefully y'all wrote that framework down on how you can go about it. Jonathan, we're going to ask you your framework next. And then after that, we're actually going to go into some common objections. So if you have common objections, make sure to put them in the Q&A. We're actually going to go over how we're going to handle them. Jonathan, you mentioned price. We are going to cover that. But we do have a lot of questions that came in, and I want to get to that. So, Carl, I'm going to actually bring this right back to you from Tanya Lee. Thank you so much for your question. Carl mentioned that often the objection you're facing isn't necessarily the reason someone is saying no. How do you suggest approaching the situation to get to the actual issue?
Really good question. First, I mean, this is what I meant a little bit about the war room response. So if somebody says then, okay, your solution is too expensive, and then you have this pre-recorded response to that solution instead. Okay, say, okay, hey, Morgan, you said that you think our solution is too expensive. Wait for them to respond and give, like, stay quiet, stay calm, and let them to provide some context to why. Get them to talk. I think silence is a very easy way to get people to talk. If it's in a cold call, right? People hate awkward silences. They will sooner or later start. It's like a chicken race to to not talk, right? So that's an easy one, but get them to talk about why without having to ask why is an easy way to get them to open up. Ask a couple of follow-up questions. And is it price related to a competitor, for example? Is it price related to that they don't have budget right now to spend on this? And then it all falls back, how good discovery have you made? If the price usually comes up later in the process, right, when you're selling B2B and a little bit more complex services. Have you done proper discovery to understand what the business case is, so the price becomes much more of a redundancy than it actually becomes the main reason of choosing you as a vendor?
Awesome. Let us know if that helped answer your question. We're going to get to the next one. Jonathan, I'm going to throw this one to you. So again, thank you for submitting that question. And by the way, I see people doing it. Upvote the ones that you want, and that will be the one that I'm going to most likely pick. So if you want to go in the Q&A and you're like, well, that question's good, upvote it. That's the one I'm going to go with. Okay, so we have Lathan Craft. Jonathan, this is for you. How does your follow-up recap email change based off of an objection than otherwise?
Okay. So maybe let me kickstart and say like how we end calls, like, because I think this is like a really nice precursor into how we would end a call. We would tend to try and end a call without the objection flowing into potentially a next call, as an example. So when we finish a call, example, we would say, out of 10, how confident are you that Cognism is the right solution for you? And they would give an answer back, and they would say like 4, 5, etc. And they would tell us what the core objection is that is blocking it potentially being like a 9 or 10. Once we've got what that bit of insight is, that's really how we do our next step. So we would say, okay, if you're still hooked on compliance as an issue and that's the thing that's holding you back, let's set up a separate session to run through that compliance as a topic. So yeah, we would tend to close the call and ask outright and say like, how confident are you in the solution? They would then surface some objections. And then our next step would tend to be around solving those objections. So yeah, I hope that answers your question in some degree.
Let us know if that helped to answer the question. We're gonna get to one more, and then we're gonna pivot here. So again, continue the upvotes because I'm just gonna take the one that is right there. Julie, I know you asked this question on how do you tackle an objection that was just received. I believe that was essentially that same one there. But if you want a little bit more on that one, Julie, just let us know. But let's go to Maria, which is, how do you deal with a customer who says they want the product but uses a long time to sign? Not a direct objection, but a passive objection. I do not like the passive objections. These are like the ones that are not fun. So who wants to tackle this one? And then we're going to pivot to the next phase here.
I can take this one. Like, so I think one of the most important things is understanding like what your buying journey is and what the typical timeframes are that come associated to purchasing a solution. Like, you're not going to be able to just push that through. Generally, in most deals, particularly in enterprise and mid-market, there's a set process that companies go through. So I think like a mutual action plan and agreement on what steps need to take place to actually get to signature and get their buy-in on that is absolutely essential. And then you've got the ability to hold them to account on those timelines. And also as well, you've got a clear path through to signature. So I think it goes back to basics 101, get that mutual action plan in place, identify the steps and get their agreement on that.
Maria, did that help answer your question? Let us know in the chat. If you need any follow-up, we will come back to you. But now what we're going to do, there's more questions and we will get back to those questions. But this is what people really want, right? The most common objections. These are typically the most common objections that you're probably going to hear from sales reps, other people, on how do you go about and tackle this information. Now, if there's a common objections that you don't think that are on here that you want to discuss, put them in the Q&A. We'll try to answer as much as we can as we have about 18 minutes left here. But let's talk about this one, right? Jonathan, I'm actually going to come back to you, right? Because you were just talking about this pricing, right? You're in the data space. There's a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot of competition. And so you're probably always having a conversation around price. How are you talking to your team and coaching them on how to handle you're too expensive?
Yeah. I think it goes back to Carl's point initially, is around that kind of discovery piece, and really understanding and trying to get like tangible metrics as to what your solution can actually provide and what kind of ROI you can get on the back of it. Because when it comes to the pricing discussion, like, we always throw it back and just say, if they say it's too expensive comparative to what? There must be a basis points that they're comparing that to. And also we would then try and tie it back to okay, but your deal cycle, and this is great. If we can get an AE to do this, it's like, well, we said your average contract value is 20,000. We've identified during the trial and the evaluation that we can do a 20% uplift on your dial to connect. The output of that is X in pipeline. Comparative to what the cost of the solution is versus to what the pipeline growth is, they're negligible. Like there's a huge, also not negligible, there's a huge variation there between what the two is. And that's really how you would tend to tackle a pricing objection, like is really getting into the detail on what the output and what you can actually get from the solution. So, and I think it really comes down as well, like when we do a trial, the trial is absolutely essential for us in our sales cycle. We don't go into that trial unless we've got an understanding as to what their current basis points are today and what expectation they have when they come out of that trial. And once we've got all that information, it makes it much easier when it comes to the pricing negotiation, because we got agreement from them that if we met X metrics, they identified that there's a business case and they would actually push forward with that. So yeah, I think it really comes back to putting in the groundwork earlier on in the sales cycle, to be honest.
Awesome. And then hopefully that was helpful there. And then let's go to the next one. Carlos, talk to you. I'll have to speak to my boss about this. So that's where obviously seller has maybe speaking to maybe an influencer champion, not the decision maker, to say, hey, I got to go talk to my boss. And maybe it's at the end of the call, you're not getting the power. How are you coaching your team to handle this objection, or maybe even not even get to this objection so practically it doesn't happen?
I mean, this is about, of course, like engaging the right stakeholders early on in the deal. It goes down to discovery again. We talked about this in the last episode. Do you understand the buying criteria, the buyer's process, and the different stakeholders? Have you trained people accurately on personas? You know that they're going to be involved. It's not like if you're selling a product that has product market fit and you have a couple of salespeople, the different people involved in deciding to purchase that product shouldn't come as a shock to you in any case. There's of course differences in businesses, but number one part, if that comes up and we haven't spoken to them, okay, great, you need to involve he or she. What is it that person's going to care about when it comes to making a decision on moving on product X or product Y? So trying to understand why they're getting involved. An easy question is, are this person usually getting involved in decisions on this level, and to what degree? Like, have they been involved in decision purchasing? And there's a powerful question you can ask earlier in the process. Have you bought something similar to our solution before? How did that go down? Who were involved in that process? That's a very easy, unarming question that you can ask to map the stakeholder complexity. But I think that's actually a good thing. You actually have a lot of people who don't tell you, I need to speak to my boss. And then you think you're talking to the person who's going to make the decision. So I actually see this as a positive. I always see the half glass full kind of situation from every opportunity. But again, truly understand who's that persona, what do they care about? Then if I don't get to power, like you said, Morgan, really, really important, I would try to frame it. How can I help you, Morgan, to present to person X, right? How can I help you to get this through? So it's also a good litmus test to understand if they're introducing you to that person and actually want to help you, they're a true champion, right? But if they're not, they're blocking you in the deal, then you can figure out what are the other blockers and why we're not getting access to that person. But if not, we talked about mutual action plans, right? And getting that established early is a way to combat this, and also working with a way to actually present clear, short business case. We worked and I was taught by a previous mentor early on in my career when it came to sales, like doing executive briefs. When you don't get access to that person, deliver an executive brief, offer 15 minutes to explain. I give a compliment to the person I'm talking to. Hey, I'm talking to Morgan on your team. Fantastic guy, by the way. But I thought you'd care about X, Y, and Z that we talked about. Connect it to the objectives that this persona cares about. Would you care for 10, 15 minutes? I explain why we're talking about this. And lo and behold, this is the reason why Get Accept exists. It's about handling this complexity. We have the mutual action plans. We have that deliverable to deliver those digital sales rooms so you can get access to stakeholders that you can't speak to online or in person. But again, that's how we've taught our team. But again, see it as a great opportunity if they bring up a boss, understand what the boss cares about, try to contact them. Even if the person doesn't say, hey, don't contact the person, I would still go above that, because without talking to C-level people today, you're not going to get the deal across. You can do that with a little bit finesse without putting your champion or your main stakeholder at risk in some sort of way.
All right, well, Carl with the mic drop. We might as well end the webinar now. Just kidding. But the thing is, like, this is great insight here, right? So, and Katrina, I want to go to you because I believe that answered the question that you put in the chat. Let us know that was a fantastic question on top of what that objection was. But let us know, Katrina, that helped. Also, as well, speaking of help, as we wrap up in the last 10 minutes, we're going to go through the rest of the questions. We'll announce who's won here on the best question as we get towards the end. But for everyone who is still here, question for you all in the chat. Has this been helpful or impactful for you so far? Just let us know if it's been helpful or impactful so far in the chat. This gives a gauge if the content is landing with you, if this is helpful for you to use. We're coming right out of this call to go get some more meetings or close some deals. So let us know in the chat if it's been helpful. And if this has been helpful so far, two things for you all. One is we have the Revenue Rebels newsletter where we dive deeper into these topics. That will be put into the chat so you can access that. We also, as well, we just talked about it, stakeholders. We are having a whole entire episode masterclass on how do you navigate key stakeholders and making sure that it's in a healthy way and not in a way where you're losing them or you don't even know where they're at. So that will be happening in April with Charlotte Johnson. We're super excited for that. And so again, check those into the chat. But let's get back into the questions. And yeah, Carl, what you're talking about, I think is so important, is making sure that people know what's going on within the account so you can proactively avoid these objections. And so people understand what type of communication and things that are happening. I think that's absolutely important. And if we go back to the Q&A, I mean, there's some really good ones in here. I think this is actually a good one too. I sometimes struggle with how to uncover the underlying reason behind objections. Can you share some techniques for prospects to reveal their true concerns? We've talked about a lot of different things across the board. I want to reposition this question a little bit because we're talking about stakeholders. How can you even tap into other people in the organization to figure out their true concerns? So, for example, what if you have a champion or an influencer that you build a good rapport with, but you feel like someone else has objections and you don't know them as well? Is it okay to ask them to figure out what the true concerns are? I would love for you to talk a little bit about that because I think this question can go pretty deep here on how you go about it. And John, I guess Jonathan, you can go. You're on your edge of your seat right now, so Jonathan, you can go.
This was a chicken race to see who's going to respond first.
There goes the silence. I think when it comes to stakeholder management, you really need to identify a company level and identify what the common buyers that typically take place in your buying cycle. For us, we know that the ultimate decision maker that we need to get to in some capacity is the RevOps person. And if they're not involved in the deal, we know at some point they're going to come up. And if they fill out the loop, they're likely going to block the deal. So I think really understanding what buyers are involved and what ones you haven't got access to today is probably the core thing to do. And you can do that one way or another way. You can do that through referrals from your champion and make that part of what Carl said. If they really want to drive this project forward, are they happy to do introductions to X, Y, Z? And this is why we need that introduction. Or alternatively, you can do it from a cold outbound perspective, which Carl said as well. And you can kind of give exec summaries and give reasons as to why they should be interested and involved in this project and to get them into the loop. So yeah, I think having a core understanding of your buyers and that exec team that's going to be purchasing is 101. And then utilizing your champions in an effective way to get introductions to those accounts or get introduction to those people.
Awesome. Appreciate that breakdown, Jonathan. Hopefully that helped answer the question for you all in the audience. Let us know if it didn't. Carl, I think you might have put in there. They want to know what your headset is. They want to know what your jammer
Jabra Evolve 75, I believe. It's fantastic. It doesn't suck. There's a lot of background noise here, so I'm intently, actively listening to what you are saying.
Shout out to the Jabras. Okay, Brian's got this one. Carl, we'll head into you. I'm currently shopping around and have a few other vendors to still review before making decisions. So this is an objection that this person is facing. How would you tackle this?
I mean, first and foremost, that's great that you're looking at a couple of different vendors. How are you selecting those other vendors? What criteria and why are you looking at those other vendors? Would be my first question. Just to understand, how are they positioning us? Because I don't think it's always clear cut, right? You believe you have some competitors, but what is the buying journey that your customer has gone through? How have they found you? How are they comparing you to competition? Are they looking you as a cost-effective vendor of something, or are you a premium vendor of something? It's a great insights from that perspective. The second question I would ask, okay, so that's the criteria and why you're looking at them. So far from looking at those different vendors, where do you believe, then we'll take it from GetAccept, where do you believe GetAccept stands out in a positive sense, and do you see any risks with our product comparatively to those other vendors? So I would try to, again, cover and peeling onion, understand our strengths, see what we're missing, then based on that insight, bring that up in the next call, note those things down. How do I tackle those ones? And then to what extent have we as an organization built competitor battle cards so we can actually talk about those ones and address those concerns throughout the sales process? But I always compliment them on finding other competitors. I mean, you're doing fantastic work as a buyer, and a lot of buyers haven't bought software before. So I think that's great that you're looking at a couple of other ones. What's the criteria then now going forward to create a short list of 2 to 3 vendors that you're going to look more closer at? So those are a couple of questions you could tackle it. I don't see that as an issue that they're looking at vendors. I think it's a risk if they don't mention to you that they're looking at other vendors. Something is most probably off in that deal. There's something they're not telling you about competitors, and I would not take a yes for an answer. So you're seriously telling me you're going through a process only looking at us and not looking at any other alternatives. So again, a couple of ways to tackle that situation.
That's a good call. Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, one of the key things and how you can really get success against indirect head-to-heads is you defining what the evaluation process is. And if you can get a steer on that, and you can say, look, typically when companies are looking, I'll use our example, when companies are looking at data providers, this is the process that companies usually look to run to get an objective view on what success looks like. And if you can define, as Morgan mentioned, most companies don't know how to purchase. And if the competitor has their way, they probably know what evaluation process to run to get a better output on their solution versus yours. So if you can get through to stakeholders and you can kind of build that evaluation process alongside them, that will have a huge uplift in your win rates when you face competitors generally.
Perfect. And I think you're absolutely right, though, because like if you have to correlate all those things together, because if they're not correlated, like it won't mesh. So I think those steps following them are going to be key. And for the person who asked that question, let us know if that was helpful. As we have 3 minutes left here, we got to give someone a winner for the questions. For everyone that put in their questions, shout out. These are fantastic questions that we've had here. I think we'll be able to have a chance to have one more left. But the one I like the most, and I think that had the most valuable answer, and I think that just put a lot of people's perspective in the right way, was shout out, and I'll share it on the screen, Katrina. So Katrina, you are the winner of the prize. You're going to get some merch. So shout out to you. And we will be reaching out to you. The team will be reaching out to you, to Katrina. So they will follow up with you personally after this webinar. In the chat, they'll probably let you know exactly what to do there. But they will reach out to you directly to win the merch. So shout out for this fantastic question and for allowing us to answer it so we can give value to the audience. So shout out to you, Katrina, on being the winner. And we'll send the merch to you as well. And again, the team will coordinate with you on how to get that sorted. But as we wrap up here, we have 2 minutes left. Jonathan and Carl, where can people find you? You gave some insights today, where people can find you, and then also as well, if you have any lasting bits of advice as we wrap up.
Yeah, Carl, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was waiting for you to say something, Jonathan. I know you sell data on people, so you can try to find on your platform. No, but yeah, I'm not that hidden. You'll find me on LinkedIn. My handle is Carell in one name, so it's pretty easy to find me. Reach out to me, join the conversation. We talk a lot about sales tactics and sales problem and startup growth journeys. So if you're interested in that, hit the follow and send a connection. And yeah, reach out. I learned one thing from being in Silicon Valley for many years. It's a fantastic feeling to actually help someone. So I'm hoping truly that today's session gave people 1 or 2 things that they can bring into the next sales call, next all hands, and just make a tiny change and experiment and see what happens if they put that into that test tube and see the reaction to that. So thank you for today.
Amazing. And yeah, likewise, Carl, I put my LinkedIn into the chat, guys, so feel free to connect. Happy to connect with anyone on this webinar. And also I run a Slack group as well for Revenue Syndicate. So if you're a GTM leader based in EMEA, feel free to connect to me and we can connect on that platform as well.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you both for taking your time out today. Again, if you found this session helpful today, let us know in the chat. Tons of things that were here. To recap, a couple things that I heard is, number one, understand the difference between a genuine objection and a brush off so that you have good sales interactions. Two is, when you're facing these objections, make sure that you're looping in multiple of different key stakeholders so that you can have those conversations. And number three is making sure when you're handling the objections to not go into war mode, right? Making sure that you're keeping composed and you're keeping it calm and asking those follow-up questions to really understand what's happening. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode 2 of this Revenue Rebels series. Again, the third one will be happening in April with Charlotte. The link's in the chat if you want to join us on this journey that we're going on and helping you really get to this path to close and get it becoming a better seller. So Jonathan, thanks once again for being a guest. Carl, always good chopping up with you. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Morgan.
All right. Cheers, everybody.